As life nears its end, everyone faces a series of difficult questions that require a balanced and delicate approach. Where to spend your final years? Maintain independence in your own home, move in with your children, or consider living in a specialized facility? The choice is not limited to finding a suitable place. It touches on the deepest aspects of human existence: dignity, a sense of loneliness, a desire for freedom, and hopes that, alas, are not always destined to come true. Arthur Schopenhauer once remarked that the root of all human suffering lies in illusions. Many enter maturity naively believing that they will have a time filled with care and gratitude for the years devoted to their family. However, harsh reality often makes its adjustments. Communication with children does not always bring the expected peace and support. Independent living can be much lonelier than imagined, and nursing homes, despite prejudice, can offer a decent standard of living unavailable within. The walls of one's home, where there is no proper attention. In this regard, a logical question arises: how to do the right thing? How to live old age without becoming a burden to others, but also without feeling forgotten and abandoned? Many cherish the dream of a quiet and peaceful old age surrounded by family, care, and the attention of loved ones. After many years devoted to raising children and creating a home, it is natural to expect that in old age there will be reciprocity, support, and the constant presence of relatives nearby. But unfortunately, reality is often far from ideal. Schopenhauer rightly noted that family ties arise more from necessity than from a sense of eternal gratitude. And this observation makes one wonder how justified our expectations are and how to properly prepare for this difficult stage of life. What awaits a person ahead? As they grow older, humans build their own way of life, take on the burden of responsibility, create new families, and face the diverse challenges of everyday life. And although the thread of love connecting generations remains unbreakable, the time they can devote to their parents becomes more valuable and scarce. Living together under one roof does not always mean genuine unity and closeness. Often, such coexistence brings more bitter disappointments than bright joys. Hopes for constant attention and care are dashed against the rapid pace of modern life, and what once seemed like a wonderful opportunity to strengthen family ties turns into a painful feeling of alienation and loneliness. When an elderly person crosses the threshold of their children's home, they inevitably enter a territory where their own established dynamics already exist. The slightest differences in lifestyle, which previously went unnoticed, suddenly become obvious and painful. Established daily routines, personal habits, taste preferences, and even harmless quirks can become the cause of hidden or overt conflicts. While children are absorbed in their work obligations and worries, and grandchildren are immersed in the exciting digital world, older people often feel like uninvited guests, lost in an indefinite space between sweet nostalgia for bygone times and a bitter sense of homelessness in the present. It is not uncommon for an elderly person to experience a depressing feeling of isolation and abandonment even within the same house. Conversations break off mid-sentence, family dinners turn into hurried snacks, and sincere gestures of care give way to the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Arthur Schopenhauer, the great philosopher-pessimist, once wisely warned that having high expectations of others is a sure path to inevitable disappointment. And this disappointment, like an ominous shadow, arises from the gaping abyss between our hopes and harsh reality, an abyss that can become especially painful and obvious in the relationship between aging parents and their adult children. An elderly lady faced with deteriorating health accepts her daughter's offer to move in with her. Initially, this idea seemed like an idyllic solution, promising closeness, necessary support, and strengthening of family ties. The first days of living together instilled optimism and hope that old age would not be lonely. However, the passage of time and everyday worries revealed an unsightly truth. The daughter, absorbed in work, left home early in the morning and returned late in the evening, invariably tired. The son-in-law, usually polite and courteous, avoided long conversations, preferring solitude with the television or mobile phone. The grandchildren, completely immersed in the virtual world, barely noticed her presence. Despite being surrounded by loved ones, the elderly woman felt an unexpected loneliness. Days dragged on in silence, with no opportunity to share thoughts and feelings. Interactions with family were fleeting and superficial, limited to questions about health or requests for minor help around the house. One day, in an attempt to start a conversation, she heard her daughter say, "Mom, I'm sorry, I'm really busy right now." These words, spoken without malice, became a bitter reminder that reality was far from her expectations. At that moment, she realized that living with family did not guarantee involvement in their lives. The house, the daily routine, everything belonged not to her, and her presence, however unobtrusive, seemed merely an addition to someone else's everyday life. Schopenhauer's lesson proved to be very apt. One should not seek in family the source of lasting happiness. The love of children does not run out, but their priorities inevitably change. Relying solely on cohabitation for attention and communication can lead to painful disappointment. Even partial independence may be a more reasonable choice for an elderly person. Having personal space, even in close proximity to family, allows one to maintain autonomy and avoid unrealistic expectations. After all, closeness does not always mean unity, and nothing compares to the feeling of loneliness in one's own home. Old age presents a difficult dilemma. On the one hand, the desire for independence, to make one's own decisions and live an independent life. On the other hand, the fear of loneliness, isolation, and lack of support when it is most needed. Arthur Schopenhauer warned, the less dependence on others, the less disappointment in their imperfection. Dependence inevitably breeds expectations and, consequently, the risk of disappointment. However, living in complete solitude can be worrying, especially when health requires increased attention. In this situation, a compromise solution may be living in one's own home near family. This arrangement allows the elderly person to maintain individuality and familiar routines while ensuring access to support if needed. It is important not only where one lives, but also how one builds a new stage of life, finding a way to maintain dignity and emotional comfort. Living with children can mean giving up one's personal life and submitting to someone else's routine. Moving to a nursing home can be seen as a final step toward dependence. While independent living requires planning and, above all, a state of mind that values one's own company. The question is not only the possibility of independence, but also its comfort. Many elderly people fear isolation, forgetting that true loneliness is not the absence of people, but the absence of meaning. Schopenhauer regarded solitude as a refuge for those who understand the nature of human relationships, arguing that it is often better to be alone than surrounded by superficial and tiresome interactions. After all, how many people surrounded by relatives still feel lonely? For successful independence, an elderly person needs to reconnect with themselves, create a daily routine that includes enjoyable activities, establish small social obligations, and accept the fact that life at any age requires having one's own meaning. After the death of his wife, an elderly man faced a difficult choice: how to spend the twilight of his days. His son offered his father a home in his house, but the old man was in no hurry to answer. He did not want to be a burden, and most importantly, to feel dependent on someone else's kindness. In the end, the solution came by itself. He rented a small apartment near his son's house. This allowed him to maintain his usual way of life without disturbing the family hearth, and at the same time gave him confidence that help would come quickly if needed. At first, this step caused him doubts. The night seemed endless, and the absence of a loved one at the table weighed on him. But over time, he discovered something unexpected. Solitude turned out to be not a punishment, but an opportunity. Now he woke up when he wanted, cooked food at his own pace, and devoted more time to reading and walking. He visited his son and grandchildren at his own desire, not feeling like an uninvited guest. Schopenhauer argued that life becomes easier when you stop fighting the inevitable. Having made this choice, the elderly man realized that old age does not necessarily have to be a burden or a cause for regret. It is just another stage that he was ready to go through with dignity. The main lesson that the pursuit of independence teaches is that loneliness does not always mean isolation. Old age can be a period of reflection and freedom if you learn to appreciate it without illusions. Having one's own space, independence from children, allows one to maintain a sense of self-identity and autonomy. Schopenhauer said that the highest happiness lies in self-sufficiency. Independence, when possible, is not isolation, but a valuable gift. It allows an elderly person to live by their own rules without conforming to the demands of others. This choice is not just a practical decision, but a life stance, a recognition that freedom at any age remains one of the most precious blessings. When nursing homes are mentioned, many elderly people immediately conjure up images of abandonment and loneliness. The very thought of being alienated from loved ones, living away from the comfort of home, and losing control over one's own destiny generates fear and rejection. For centuries, family traditions have ingrained the idea that children are obligated to care for their parents until their last breath. But how justified is this viewpoint? Is every nursing home truly a symbol of oblivion, or can it, under certain circumstances, become a new chapter in life, full of opportunities and joy? Arthur Schopenhauer rightly observed, "It is not where we are, but how we live, that matters." This statement takes on special meaning when we see how many elderly people spend their last years in isolation, within the walls of their own homes, deprived of companionship, care, and comprehensive support. The truth is that staying in one's own home does not always guarantee well-being, just as living in a nursing home does not necessarily mean loneliness. What matters most is not the name of the place, but the attitude toward the elderly person, the opportunities provided, and the quality of care. The rejection of nursing homes is largely due to an idealized perception of old age. It is widely believed that mature years should be spent surrounded by family, in the warmth of the family hearth, but it is often overlooked that such coexistence is not always feasible or beneficial. The problem lies not only in the lack of time for loved ones, but also in the fact that the modern pace of life dictates its own terms. Children are immersed in work, grandchildren follow their own schedules, and the elderly person often spends more time alone than they would like. The issue of health is also important. Caring for an elderly person requires dedication and specialized knowledge that many relatives, even with the most sincere desire, do not possess. Over time, such relationships can become a burden for both sides, turning care and love into a silent obligation. At the same time, a reputable nursing home can provide a person with companionship, security, and activities that fill life with meaning. Instead of feeling like a burden to the family, they find themselves in an environment that promotes a high quality of life. One elderly man always categorically rejected the idea of moving to a nursing home. In his mind, it was the last frontier before oblivion, a sign of being unwanted. For many years, he lived alone in his house. His children visited him on weekends, but most of the time they were busy with their own affairs. His days were monotonous, getting up, coffee, television, and waiting for a phone call that didn't always come. Over time, his health began to deteriorate. Forgetfulness, difficulty performing simple tasks, and constant fatigue forced his children to insist on moving to a nursing home. Reluctantly, but having no other options, he agreed. Upon arrival, his first impression was negative. He felt like a stranger, as if he had entered a waiting room for the end of life. However, over time, something amazing happened. He stopped feeling lonely. There were people his age around him with similar fates, ready to communicate and share experiences. He began to participate in activities, rediscovered the joy of board games, walks in the fresh air, and even short trips organized by the facility. Moreover, he met an old childhood friend who, by coincidence, also happened to be there. Their conversations became an important part of his life, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was part of something bigger. As Schopenhauer warned, suffering arises from resistance to change, while accepting reality can bring liberation. This elderly man realized that the problem was not the place, but his perception of the situation. The main lesson of this story is that the fear of change is often more frightening than the changes themselves. Of course, not all nursing homes are the same. Some really do not provide adequate care and attention, which makes choosing a suitable place with decent conditions and a cozy atmosphere extremely important. However, this is also true for any other decisions made in mature age. Quality of life always depends on the context and the people around you. Schopenhauer argued that illusions sometimes hold us captive more than the circumstances themselves. The main mistake is not in choosing a nursing home as such, but in stubbornly striving for an ideal that no longer corresponds to reality. It's important for each individual to assess their capabilities and make decisions that allow them to live with dignity, security, and, most importantly, without regrets. The relentless passage of time is unforgiving. Children grow up, and parents, alas, grow old. For many years, filled with selfless labor, fathers and mothers dedicate their lives to raising, educating, and protecting their children, naively believing that their efforts will inevitably be rewarded in the future. The cherished dream of many parents is to feel gratitude and genuine care from those to whom they have devoted their lives upon reaching old age. However, the harsh reality is often far from these rosy expectations. It's no secret that many elderly people experience a bitter sense of abandonment, feeling forgotten and even unfairly wronged by their grown children. The precious time that once belonged entirely to parents seems insignificant in this new reality. Visits become increasingly rare, and phone calls are hurried and fleeting. A heavy feeling of loneliness inexorably grows, compounded by resentment and disappointment. At the same time, as Schopenhauer wisely noted, the relationship between parents and children is primarily a biological contract, not an unbreakable bond of eternal debt. Children do not choose the moment of their birth, and as they become adults and independent individuals, they inevitably begin to build their own lives, just as their parents once did. The common idea that children are obliged to repay everything they received in childhood is nothing more than an expectation formed by the parents themselves, not a universal rule of life. The root of the problem lies not in the lack of love from the children, but in the naive illusion that gratitude will be expressed constantly and unconditionally. It is precisely the exaggerated expectations of recognition and unceasing attention that often cause deep disappointment. The relentless passage of time transforms the relationship between generations. In early childhood, parents are the center of the universe for their children. However, as children grow older, they develop new priorities: career, personal relationships, their own children, and various life challenges. The attention that was previously focused entirely on parents naturally dissipates. This does not mean that love disappears, but the fast pace of modern life and new responsibilities distance children from their parents, sometimes even unconsciously. For elderly people, this distancing can be painfully perceived as betrayal and abandonment. For children, it is a natural and inevitable continuation of life's journey. Schopenhauer rightly argued that human suffering stems from unmet expectations. Those who place too much hope in others are inevitably doomed to disappointment. And perhaps the most common illusion of parents is their firm belief that their children will always be ready to offer them the same level of care and attention they received in childhood. However, the cycle of life is based not on the principle of repayment, but on the principle of transmission. Just as parents once distanced themselves from their own parents to build their own lives, their children are now doing the same. The error lies not in the fact that children distance themselves, but in the naive belief that they should act otherwise. At the heart of the narrative is the fate of a woman who dedicated her life to raising her children. She worked tirelessly, showed constant care, and sacrificed personal aspirations for the well-being of her children. Never expressing regret for the sacrifices made, she hoped that in the future her children would surround her with attention and love, generously replenishing all her efforts. In her old age, she dreamed of regular visits, heartfelt conversations, and perhaps even an offer to live in one of their homes. However, reality turned out differently. She was surrounded by silence. The children still loved their mother, but the daily worries and the fast pace of life did not allow them to devote enough time to her. Phone calls were short, meetings were rare and fleeting. During visits, the children were absorbed in their affairs and obligations, not finding time for thorough conversations. The woman tried to share memories, tell stories from the past, but felt that her words did not resonate. Once, indulging in nostalgia, she confessed to one of her sons that she missed the times when they were children and spent whole days together. The son, not realizing the depth of her words, replied with a smile, "Mom, life doesn't stand still. I now have my own family to take care of." At that moment, she came to a realization that she had previously avoided. No one had abandoned her. She simply placed expectations on her children that they could not fulfill. As Schopenhauer said, the greatest. Part of human suffering is derived from the expectation. It wasn't easy to accept this truth, but she realized that the long-awaited gratitude wouldn't manifest in the way she had imagined, and that perhaps it was time to learn to live for herself. The main lesson that old age teaches is the realization that no one owes anyone anything. Children don't stop loving their parents, but their love manifests differently than parental love. While parents see their children as the main achievement of their lives, children strive to build their own destinies and create their own stories. Whoever enters old age expecting recognition and gratitude risks drowning in resentment and loneliness. Schopenhauer argued that wisdom lies in accepting life as it is, not as we would like it to be. Old age should not be a time of lamenting the lack of gratitude, but rather a period of liberation. By abandoning expectations, one can learn to live one's life with greater ease and without excessive demands on others. The approach of old age is an inevitable stage awaiting everyone, but not everyone has the ability to accept it with dignity. For some, old age appears as a period of inevitable decline, marked by losses and limitations, like the sunset of life. Others, on the contrary, desperately resist its onset, naively believing that they can stop the relentless march of time. And only a few find new horizons in old age, a unique opportunity to enjoy life, enriched by wisdom and freed from excessive expectations. As the wise Schopenhauer claimed, the key to a serene old age lies in accepting reality in all its fullness, without illusory notions. Suffering, as a rule, is caused not by age itself, but by a desperate struggle with what cannot be changed. Many elderly people live in a state of constant anxiety, expecting attention, recognition, and care from others. However, true happiness lies not in waiting for mercy from children, family, or society, but in what a person can create for themselves. Old age often brings loneliness, but it's worth remembering that being surrounded by people doesn't always guarantee true connection. Many relationships turn out to be superficial, supported more by social conventions than by genuine affection. There are many who, living surrounded by family, still experience a deep sense of loneliness. For some, living near children can be a source of comfort and closeness, while for others, loneliness is preferable to forced communication. It's important not to blindly follow imposed ideals, but to find harmony between the desired and the possible. Schopenhauer warns against the danger of emotional dependence. The more a person relies on others in search of meaning in life, the more vulnerable they become in the face of rejection and disappointment. Therefore, the main thing in old age is not the presence of company, but the ability to maintain self-respect and remain the master of one's own life. Accepting old age also implies freedom from guilt for striving to live for oneself. Many elderly people, having reached this stage of life, continue to try to please their children, fearing becoming a burden and suppressing their own desires. But what's the point of dedicating one's whole life to others, only to remain bound by these obligations in old age? Schopenhauer argued that a person finds true peace only when they learn to live in harmony with themselves. If we cannot change those around us, we can always change our attitude to life. And old age can become a period of genuine freedom, freedom to say no to what doesn't matter, to avoid places where we are not welcome, to choose those who are dear to us, and to live at our own pace. Ultimately, age doesn't deprive a person of the right to happiness. On the contrary, it should only intensify this desire. Old age is not a time for waiting for something. Anticipation of a visit from children, a call from loved ones, or simply signs of attention. This is what often fills the days of elderly people. However, time relentlessly marches on, and the hope for recognition or company can turn into bitter disappointment. Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, teaches that true peace of mind comes through liberation from expectations, through rejecting the idea that others owe us something. It's important to focus on what you can do for yourself, on personal fulfillment and self-sufficiency. Each person must independently pave their way in old age. Some will prefer to live near their children and grandchildren, feeling the warmth of the family hearth. Others will strive for independence and self-reliance, and still others will find peace and harmony in solitude. None of these options is wrong if it's a conscious and deliberate choice and not a forced measure dictated by circumstances. The main thing is to preserve a sense of self-worth, to continue living a full life without allowing the burden of past grievances or unfulfilled hopes to overshadow the present. Old age is not the sunset of life, not a sad finale, but just a new chapter in the book of fate. And it is up to each individual to decide how they want to write it, what colors to fill it with. Old age is a topic shrouded in many doubts, fears, and prejudices. For some, it is a time of solitude and self-analysis, an opportunity to look deep within themselves and rethink the years they have lived. For others, it is a period of rapprochement with family, a chance to enjoy the strong bonds that have been built throughout life. Ultimately, each person is unique, and each has their own unique way to meet and live through this important stage. The main question that does not lose its relevance is, how is it better to live your years? Should you prefer the company of people, even if this communication does not always bring the desired satisfaction, or should you maintain your independence, realizing that this may lead to loneliness? It is sometimes impossible to find a definite answer to this dilemma. The aging process is shaped both by our own decisions and by circumstances that we cannot change. We have the opportunity to choose our place of residence, our circle of friends, our activities, but we cannot control the feelings of others or force them to pay us more attention than they are willing to offer. That is why Schopenhauer argued that happiness should not depend on the presence of other people, but rather on our ability to find meaning and satisfaction in our own existence.